So first of all, an official welcome from me on behalf of the DIA. So you may have well joined one of our webinars before. We're trying to do one of these a month. And today's topic, as you obviously well know, is on the mock testing. So we'll introduce Graham in just a second. Just before we get into the main meat and bones of things, just an opportunity perhaps for us to share a few things in relation to the DIA and what we're up to. So in my role, I'm sort of looking after the training side of things and the CPD within the DIA Academy there. So you've got the little email address there if you haven't got a note of that already. We have got the DIA Academy YouTube channel as well. So for colleagues that may be interested in this session today that have not been able to join in, do pass on the word that this can be viewed on our YouTube channel at a later date when you're at home having your dinner or whatever. So I would recommend as well, actually, if you do log on there, ladies and gents, to just subscribe to that channel, and then anytime any of our webinars get uploaded, as I'm sure you know how that works, you get a notification. So that might be a good idea just to subscribe to the DIA Academy channel. All right. So our next webinar, just to give that a quick plug, is just in about 2 weeks' time, which is on ADAS, Advanced Driving Assistance Systems. So Steve Boyle, who's an expert in that area, is going to be hosting that one for us. So that'll just be talking about all the new modern features that cars are having these days, and just to up our knowledge on that, so you can pass that on to your pupils where appropriate. And just a few other courses that we're doing as well coming up. We've got a half-day classroom workshop here at our Crawley office on coaching skills. So that's one that we particularly wanted to give a little plug to. So that's on the 29th of June this month. So there's still spaces available on there. And of course, to our conference, we wanted to give a quick plug to that. So that's coming up at the end of the year on the 24th of November. We've got Loveday Ryder, the Chief Executive of DVSA, coming along to that, as she was at our last one as well. And hopefully some other senior DVSA personnel. And we're hoping to have the Transport Minister as well, but that's still to be confirmed, other workshops. And at the lovely venue of the British Motor Museum. So if you haven't already booked a ticket for that, please do. Wonderful. So our presentation today is going to be about 20 minutes or so long. And then what we'll do, folks, if it's okay with you, we'll just take questions at the end. But we do have the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So do feel free to post questions as and when they come to mind. But if it's okay, we'll answer them at the end, and that won't interrupt with the flow of the presentation. And if we could ask specifically, please do keep your questions on topic. So please make sure your questions are relating to mock testing or testing generally. We won't be able to answer any other questions about waiting times or anything today. All right. So do familiarize yourself with the Q&A box down there. That's probably a little bit better than the chat. All righty. I can see one question in there already. We'll try and answer that one a bit later, Helen. Okay. If you want to have a little play with the reactions box, folks, just to make the presentation a little bit interactive, there's the reactions box. Oh, that's it. Look at that. Thumbs up, party poppers, and so on. All right, that's it. Thank you for doing that. It's always nice to know that you're there. It's always a little bit strange doing these webinars because it's just myself and Graham today on the screen. We can't see you, of course. I'm sure you realize that. So do interact with us with the Q&As and so on. Brilliant. Thank you. So at this time, we'll hand over to Graham. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you to the DIA for inviting us along today to talk about delivering realistic mock tests, which is part of the wider campaign of the Ready to Pass. My name is Graham O'Brien. I'm one of the Assistant Chief Driving Examiners. Been with the agency about 17 years and was an ADI like most of the people on the call today prior to that for 5 years. So appreciate the challenging but rewarding job that you do on a day-to-day basis. I think, the Ready to Pass campaign came out of COVID, but was probably something that, we would have liked to done anyway. And I think hopefully the engagement that we're gaining with ADIs through this campaign, you find, you appreciate that, because we certainly appreciate the engagement back, which has prompted this kind of follow-up webinar, if you like, because I'm sure some of you will be aware we did some webinars last year about mock tests, carrying out realistic mock tests. we did some research initially to ask you folks how many of you carry out them, you know, and all that kind of good stuff. And we realized that there was probably a lack of information that we could provide in terms of delivering realistic mock tests to enable you to deliver them better. So we did that as part of the Ready to Pass campaign, and we've been monitoring that since. And I guess, you know, you may be aware we've done some research recently when the findings were published around how the impact of delivering more realistic mock tests has been landing, and that's what we're here to talk today about. But I'm sure there's lots of people on the call, you know, I'm preaching to the converted in terms of whether or not you carry out mock tests, but there may be some new ADIs, there may be some people who maybe don't carry out mock tests, and there may be some who are a little bit unsure. So I think Kevin and I mentioned that we'd maybe like just a quick straw poll in terms of in the chat to say either yes or no. If we just ask the simple question, do you carry out mock tests? Feel free to drop a little yes or no into that, and we can monitor that as we move forward. Like Kevin said, there's going to be an opportunity for questions at the end, so we'll try to answer as many of those as we can on topic. Happy to answer anything about the driving test generally if I can. Can't really speak about waiting times and whatnot on this particular call today. Okay, so let's delve into the presentation. So why do a mock test? We firmly believe that the mock test should just be a part of the learning to drive process, really. You know, at the right time, the mock test comes in and it validates that learning, but it can play much more of a part as well. You know, we'll delve into that a bit more as we go through this. You know, it helps pupils understand what's involved. If you're anything like me, you like to know if you're about to embark on something, you mentally think it through. But if you have the opportunity to physically do it as well prior to the actual event, then that can ease all sorts of anxieties. It can build a bit of confidence. I'm certainly the kind of person that likes to know what's what. You know, I'm the person who arrives at the airport half an hour prior to that time, you know, and I'm sure most of us on the call are probably like that. And I think a mock test is no different. It allows people, you know, to experience what's going to be involved on the day. And that's why we've provided the information from the end to end, really, to make it as realistic as possible. So your pupil, when they arrive at the test centre, nothing's really going to surprise them. Of course, it can help manage pupils' and parents' expectations. You know, I'm sure you've all quite frequently deal with that difficult conversation sometimes at the end of a lesson when a pupil randomly says, I think I'm going to book my test, when you firmly believe they're not at that stage, they're not ready. So again, it can be, if you like, well, okay, how about we do a mock test just as a benchmarking process to see where we're at? Chances are that's going to highlight your concerns, and that mock test wasn't necessarily how you'd expect it to go in terms of saying, yes, we're ready to go. It can have the opposite effect, which is also useful, isn't it, in terms of managing expectations. But it's all about that, you know, assessing the pupil's readiness to drive independently, and they're doing it consistently. So we believe if you can keep it as realistic as possible, you know, and do an end-to-end one when they're at the right time, it really is confirmation to say, yes, we're at the stage now where we can actually move in and look at booking a test. Of course, at the moment, we know the waiting times are unacceptably long, and we're doing what we can to overcome that. That makes it a bit tricky in terms of when you actually schedule the mock testing, in terms of booking the test. Appreciate that that's not as you know, as slick as it should be in terms of that time process, but that's something you need to manage at the moment. So let's delve into some of the research findings that we've got. And I want to just thank people. I'm sure there's people on the call who took part in the recent research that we asked you to provide us some information on. We had well over 3,000 responses of that. That was specifically around, you know, the mock test. There's still a link that's out asking you how your day-to-day activities are as an ADI, which, you know, is really beneficial if you can fill in that research for us. I believe that's open till the end of June. But this specific data that we're looking at is from the findings that we've just recently published. So we can see here it's saying 47% of learners was the pass rate for people who didn't do a mock test with all the real elements, as opposed to 65% pass rate for those who did a mock test, including all those elements. So that for us is really, really pleasing. You know, that kind of validates why we did this campaign in the first place, because you said to us that we probably don't know as much as we should do about our mock test. We'd like some more information to make it as realistic as we can, so it reflects what will happen on the actual day. We've provided that information. You folks have then done the hard work of taking out and encouraging people to do mock tests, and lo and behold, we've got some really pleasing figures off the back of that. So I think that 65% there pass rate as opposed to 47, there's probably a few factors in that. Maybe some of the factors might be you did a mock test with somebody and it really highlighted the areas that needed to be worked on, and you went away and worked on them. Or you did a mock test and it boosted somebody's confidence. They did really well. They thought, well, actually, yeah, I can go now and do this test, and nothing's going to take me by surprise. So I'm sure there's a lot of factors why that 65% pass rate as opposed to the 47. We'll continue to monitor that, but we'd like to think we can build on that. But it's a really pleasing start. So that's was one of the highlights of the research findings. So increased demand for mock tests. So we're seeing around 67% of learners that took a mock test in May in 2023, which is good. There's been an increase of around 21% more requests for mock tests than usual, and around 19% of ADIs are offering more tests more frequently. So again, this is all part of that research that we did with you folks recently. So again, all pleasing figures, much more increase than before we launched this information.
I could just interject there, could I? While we're on the stats there, Graham, that just a little live sort of poll that we did there, as it were, there were about 31 that are online at the minute who said yes, they do mock tests currently. One using another local instructor, which I think is a good idea to do the mock test with. One who's just about to start doing mock tests, and two no's.
Two no's, okay.
And most importantly, there was one person that does mock tests, not just any mock test, but with the high-vis vest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That question did come up on the webinar on Monday evening in terms of if it's okay to wear the yellow vest whilst conducting a mock test, and yeah, that's absolutely fine. We used to be able to, as examiners, remove the high-vis vest during a test if it could be slightly off-putting to a candidate. It highlights the fact that you are on a test, doesn't it? But unfortunately we can't now, because the body cam's attached to the high-vis, so we don't have the opportunity to remove it at the candidate's request. So it's an interesting one. But coming back to the figures you mentioned there, yeah, there's a couple of people who don't, and I can understand that, because I think the arguments against might be you don't want to instill overconfidence, or you don't want to I don't know. It'd be interesting. Some of the questions may come up, but like I mentioned earlier, we firmly do believe that it should be a part of the learning to drive process. And if you encourage it, or almost let people know, at the very early stages that it will be, and highlight the benefits, of course, it needs to be a kind of two-way decision with the student as well. And there may be some students who don't want to do a mock test, and that's absolutely fine. But as long as you've highlighted the benefits of what they are, and hopefully some of these figures that you're seeing on the screen might give you that nudge, if you like, to maybe promote it a little bit more. Or even if you're one of the two no's and it's because you don't offer it, maybe that's okay, but maybe give the student the option and say, this is a part of something we can do in terms of preparation. Would you like to do a mock test in terms of preparation before we book the test? So interesting, but we'll I'm sure that may come back up again in the questions. So some more data there in front of us. So we've got around 90% of learners who took a mock test said that it included parts of the real wear, as opposed to 86% said it helped increase their confidence ahead of the real driving test, which is an interesting one, confidence, because you can look at it two ways, can't we? We can look at that's a good thing, or we can also look at overconfidence as being a potentially negative thing if somebody's overconfident. Whereas I like to think it is more about almost a comfort thing as well, a comfort in terms of comfortable confidence, which is something where you've been through the process. You think, actually now, yeah, that's eased some of my concerns. I've highlighted a couple of areas that maybe we need to, focus on a little bit more. So it's an interesting one, but I'm sure there's been a lot of people as well on this call who've sat in on driving tests with their students, and you've been teaching them to drive from the start, and you've got a pretty solid understanding that they're driving well. They may not have done a mock test. Comes to the day, you're sitting in on the back of the test, and lo and behold, it's almost like a completely different driver that you see and drive the car. Could some of the things we're talking about prevent that? We've all seen it. I saw it when I was an ADI. The test nerves get the better of somebody. They're making silly mistakes that they wouldn't normally do. If they'd had that opportunity to be under the microscope in a mock test environment, especially like you just mentioned there, Kevin, in terms of maybe doing it with a colleague, so an unfamiliar scenario, which again highlights that anxiety, maybe just to try to incorporate some coping strategies of how we do this. Listen, you're going to stop a number of times during the test. Utilize that opportunity to maybe take a drink of water, take a few breaths, take your time. That's within your gift. So by walking through those processes, seeing them, feeling them, experiencing, when it actually comes to the day, it's not new. It doesn't take you immediately out of your comfort zone because you've been there. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think there's some food for thought there. And we move on. So understanding mock test results. This is where I'm going to ask for a little bit of your help, really. This came back in the research, and we were a little bit unsure as to why we had 11.4% of learners say they weren't sure if they'd passed or failed their mock test. We have a few thoughts as to why, but we'd maybe be interested in your thoughts that you could drop in the comments as to why 11.4% of learners were unsure if they passed or failed their mock test. Could be they misinterpreted the question in terms of, was their understanding of if they passed or failed the same as the instructors before they delivered the result, let's say, or did you not get to deliver the result for logistical reasons, or you needed to stop the test short, or was it maybe some people didn't want to say that they failed the mock test in the survey? Who knows? There might be a number of reasons there, but 11.4% was a little bit higher than what we thought would come under the unsure category of whether they passed or failed their mock test. Helping understand the mock test results. I've spoke about this before, and I'm sure people have heard this, but I think again a real benefit of the mock test is an opportunity to create that kind of environment in the car where you allow the student to reflect on their own performance. So you get to the end of the mock test. Do you mirror what the examiner would do in terms of that's the end of the test and deliver the result immediately? Or do you adopt a more coaching approach in terms of that's the end? How did that feel? How do you think you did? What would you do differently? All those kind of, open questions to try to gain a true, whether or not they're seeing their driving reflective of the actual performance. Do they remember a lot of it? Yourself, when students have come to you, if you didn't listen to the debrief, they might have said, "Oh yes, where did you go on your test?" "Oh, I went here, I went there, then I was over there." And you think there's no way you could have gone to all those places in that 30 minutes. So their, recollection of that experience might not necessarily be accurate. So it's an opportunity there to delve into different options, I guess, of how you gauge their own reflection of the performance. And of course, it's a great opportunity to then structure what needs to be done next, what areas need to be tackled. Can you immediately go and do that in the remaining part of the lesson if it's available? So it's a great opportunity, again, with the mock test to run that end-to-end test, and then at the end of it, really create some real great talking points to be able to structure the remedial moving forward. Okay. So feedback from ADIs. So 96% of ADIs said that they found the mock test guidance useful, which is great. And we're seeing, as we can see there, around 22% said they've changed the way they carry out the mock tests to make it more realistic, to make it more like the actual day in terms of maybe using the wordings that the examiners use, how they mark the actual faults. I'm not sure if that's on the next slide or yeah, it's on this one. Sorry. Yeah. What I was going to say, which was on the previous slide, and I didn't mention, is around when to actually mark the faults. We asked ADIs previously before we launched the initial guidance when they mark a fault on a mock test, and there was quite a big difference. Some were telling us that they would mark the fault immediately, so sorry, not mark the fault, talk about the fault. So actually make the student aware of the fault that they've made. We would urge you to leave that till the end, to actually discuss a fault as opposed to discussing them as they happen. Why? Well, a few reasons really. We want it to be realistic to the actual driving test. We don't, an examiner's not going to give a running commentary of the faults that happen during the test. And also, probably more importantly, allows the student to immerse themselves into that situation, that test. It's more realistic to what will happen on the day. It's going to be quite distracting if you're mentioning the faults as they happen. Of course, there's a caveat to that. If you feel like, again, forgive me for teaching you how to suck eggs, but if you feel like you need to break away from the mock test because something significant's happened that you feel needs to be discussed and dealt with there and then of course. But if it's manageable and you can maintain it till the end, then try not to give any feedback until the end of that test for the benefits we've mentioned. Okay. We did also get asked about it's difficult to mark the faults down on your on the marking sheet during the actual mock test itself, and I appreciate that. You're looking for an opportunity. We use the term comfort zone in our world. Examiners mark the iPad now, or previously the DL25, in what we call a comfort zone. The comfort zone's basically when you're not entering, negotiating, or exiting a hazard. It's a stretch of road where it's relatively calm. You've got an opportunity to take your eyes off the road, off the candidate for a moment, to just locate that fault and get it down. If you don't do that and you think I'll mark them at the end, good luck. You might have a better memory than me, because trying to remember all the faults that happen throughout a test is quite difficult. So looking for a comfort zone to mark them down would be beneficial during the actual mock test itself. So I'm on to the penultimate slide now before we move over to questions. So this is just a reminder really of where all our information is on gov.uk about carrying out mock tests. I'm sure most of you have been on there. If you haven't, take the opportunity to delve into it. There's some really useful info there. We literally made a conscious decision to provide you with as much information as possible. So we've got all the wordings on there. We've got all the information for locating faults, where's the best place to mark a fault, and we give some examples of that. There's quite a chunk of information. It'll be quite difficult to digest in one piece, but I'm sure you can nip in and out of there to actually have a look. And also on that point, and the Ready to Pass campaign wider, we really would welcome your feedback of how we can build this to enable you to do your jobs as well as you can. So if there's anything that you think that would be really useful, if it's a reasonable request, we can look to provide that as well. I mentioned this on the webinar the other night, but I've been with the agency for 17 years, and I believe with this Ready to Pass campaign and some of the test centre open days that we're doing around the country at the moment, I think this is some of the best engagement the agency's had with ADIs, certainly in the time I've been there. And I don't just say this, I do mean it. We welcome your feedback to try to work collaboratively better, so we can, because ultimately you guys do the really difficult job of teaching people to drive. We rubber stamp that. So it's you folks who do the hard work day in, day out. So if there's anything we can do to make your lives easier and work closer together, then we'd definitely welcome that. So I think that's all from me, Kevin. I think we're okay to move into the Q&A.
Sure. Yeah. So folks, I know there's some general comments coming through. So just to reassure you, by the way, I know I've said this is recorded, but any comments or anything that goes in the chat doesn't get picked up on the recording. So So just wanted to reassure you with that thought in case you were a little bit hesitant about asking. Didn't want it to be all over YouTube. But I will perhaps just read a few of the comments out, because some of them are just comments, and it might just be a little bit thought-provoking. I think most of you can probably see them for yourself actually when it's in the chat box. So let's just scroll back up here for a moment. Some saying that I do mock students, but because of the delay, almost as soon as they pass the theory, they want a practical booked, as the next test is not available to November. So perhaps sometimes, yeah, difficult to pitch when to do the mock test in those cases. So that's one of the general comments there. Someone else has commented that they've heightened the amount of mock tests that they do since the waiting times have gone up, and people are booking their tests way before they are ready without my permission. But the good thing about the mock test, it can highlight that they are not ready, and then they can see for themselves instead of them thinking that I might be getting more lessons out of them or more money. Yeah. So that's
I think that's a really interesting point as well, Kevin. While you maybe look through some of the questions, just to delve into that a little bit, in terms of, we often get asked when's the best time to introduce the mock test, and only you know when it's best, in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of your student. But my advice would be, if you can introduce elements of it, like a stepping stone into that independence, and I'm sure you do this, so again, forgive me for stating the obvious, but once somebody has shown some competence in some junction work and they're starting to do that fairly consistently well, why not say, okay, I'll give 3 directions and allow them to then drive those junctions independently for a little bit of time, and then increase that. What that does is it encourages you as well. I was always guilty of this when I was in ADI, for maybe just over teaching a little bit, because it's so easy to do. It's so easy to just be that kind of prompt too early, as opposed to allowing somebody to just demonstrate what they can do and demonstrate that independence. And of course, that then becomes a stepping stone into more and more, where you say, okay, even though they might not be ready to book a test, you say, shall we just try maybe 15 minutes of driving independent on this section? And again, I know this is what you do, but it leads itself nicely then into a mock test, and it's all preparing that person for the day when ultimately they're driving completely independently, aren't they? In terms of on the actual test.
Yeah, I like that idea, sort of breaking it down into sections, building it up gradually, perhaps. Yeah. Another little comment here. I tell my students that the mock tests are harder than the real thing, because I make them do all 4 maneuvers on the mocks instead of just the one on the test day. And I think someone else had commented similarly that they don't want to sort of lead them into a false sense of security, as it were. So that's one approach.
Yeah, that's very mean, but no, I can see the benefit of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's like you said, you don't know which maneuver you're going to get on the day, of course. And I think we all know some students prefer some maneuvers to others, don't they? But yeah, a little bit mean, but I can see the value in that.
Yeah. And some general comments about what you were commenting on earlier with when to mark people as they're driving along, and most folks are saying that they do usually give the feedback at the end, and they ask the student whether they think they've passed or not, and use that as a discussion to point as to them assessing their own ability, and then take the discussion on from there, where they think they didn't do so well, what they did do well, and what they think they can improve. So using that as a discussion point, that sounds good. Just scrolling through again a little bit more here. End of the mock. Yeah. Someone saying they don't use the official marking sheet, but just make a quick note of and tot up all of the faults if there are any at the end.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, isn't it? I know everybody on the call knows this, that it does need to be marked on paper as opposed to using a tablet. We can use the tablet because, of course, we're the accompanying driver and not the responsible, so from that point of view, we can. Again, if we are doing it completely realistically, at the end of the test, it's as you know, the examiner debriefs the serious faults. If it's a fail, all of the serious faults. If it's a pass, the examiner will depending on how many driving faults there'll be, will debrief either all of the faults or the more prominent ones, if you like, at the end of the test in that order. So the examiner would always, if there was a dangerous fault, would debrief that one first, then the serious, and if there was any driving faults of note, potentially debrief on that. But again, I always like to just emphasize this if we can. If there's any newer ADIs on the call and you've not sat in on a driving test, I would really encourage you to do that. And even if you're not new, if you can try to make that a part of the process with the learner from the early stages in saying, listen, this is an option, I can sit in on the test. I do appreciate it's not the easiest thing in the world to do as an ADI. You know, I've sat there, I've done it. It's not the easiest thing, but I think we'd all agree there's some value in it in terms of what we get to see, what we can then do if there needs to be some, you know, remedial structure in place. But it really will, you know, benefit you delivering your mock tests as well. It will help with seeing how the examiners maybe assess some of the faults in terms of you might have thought it might be a driving fault, whereas the examiner's not actually marked anything for that scenario. We sometimes get questions around that, around the assessment. But sitting in on the back of the test, it really is invaluable. But again, it needs to be in conjunction with the student, whether they're happy with it. But I think the earlier you kind of discuss that and highlight the benefits of sitting in on the back, then they don't seem too spooked about it. Whereas if you say, because we quite often, you know, walk into the waiting room and ask if your accompanying driver would like to come, and it doesn't always seem like that discussion has taken place. It sometimes looks like a little bit of a surprise that it's not. So I would encourage to have that conversation and make a decision one way or the other, whether, you know, you go into a company or not, highlight the benefits, but ultimately it's the student's decision, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, you've commented about that at your test centre, you have test centre meetings, beg your pardon, between the senior and ADI, but there's been a change recently. You've commented. I wonder if you just give us a bit more info on that. What you meant by that? What change is it that has happened? But it's good that you're obviously having the meetings, but maybe you could just elaborate a little bit for us what the change is that you've noticed. A little question here. Why don't driver faults get discussed at the end of a practical test, as these are also important to learn what's caused a fault so that we can learn for others? Examiners tell us that they can only discuss serious or dangerous faults.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like what I've just been touching on. The examiner on a fail will debrief. If there is dangerous faults, they'll start with the dangerous faults, because obviously that's where, you know, the most significant thing has happened. So we'll start with the dangerous faults, then the serious faults. In terms of why we don't go into the driving faults as well, you know, it's a good question, and I can understand. It's almost there's a number of reasons, but to name one, it's almost like, you know, if somebody's failed and they've already been debriefed the dangerous and the serious, whilst I can appreciate there'll be some value in listening to the driving faults, it's almost like, you know, would that really knock somebody's you know, confidence in what's happened? It could come across as, you know, in terms of the severity, and quite often we'll find if somebody's demonstrated a serious or dangerous deficiency in one of the areas, there's probably been something prior to that in terms of a driving fault in that area. So we've usually discussed it. If there's a case of a number of driving faults in one location, or one box, I should mean, one competence, then that occasionally can be mentioned as well. But it's almost like we don't really want to beat somebody up after they've had the dangerous and the serious. But yeah, it is a good question, and I guess it's how much can be taken on board as well at that particular time. But if somebody said, I notice I've got a few driving faults there, could you mention them? That would be absolutely fine. You know, I think the vast majority of people once they've had the debrief of the dangerous and the serious, are probably starting to disengage in that process already. So I can see from a driving instructor's point of view, it would be really beneficial. And I'm sure a lot of you will agree on the call that the debrief, whilst it's very important, and it's probably more important that the instructor listens to it, because they probably absorb more of it than what the student does. Whether it's euphoria or disappointment, those feelings probably get in the way of actually taking that information on board at that particular time. I did a really good job at not answering the question there.
I understood it.
Okay.
I guess there's also the time element as well, is that there's a limited time that the examiner's got to give feedback, so they just prioritize the most significant stuff. But it's good to know that you can ask anyway. I think that hopefully useful for some. What else have we got here? Quite a few questions coming in now. They're still going up. There's quite a good thought here. Someone said, I always drive after the mock test to allow the student time to reflect on the mock test that they've just done, and then use that time for more coaching and Q&A. So that's quite a good thought there. I'm scrolling through some that are just sort of comments and some that might be worth just airing there, if that's okay. I suggest that they are ready for the practical test. They don't need me sitting behind them. They also that I can't help them. So yeah, just explaining a little bit about what happens if the instructor does sit behind. Could you highlight the benefits for the student with the ADI sitting in on the test?
I think, like we've just mentioned there, the debrief is a snapshot. It's a snapshot of what's happened over that 35 minutes. Whereas from an instructional point of view, every element of what's happened is probably really key to capture and understand how they've driven in relation to how they would normally drive, the impact of the test that's happened. You may be going to different areas, different scenarios where somebody's not dealing with things as well as maybe they should be. So I think it's just that overall experience as well. Yeah. I do take on board the point that you just read out from a comment. There's not much you can do. There's certainly nothing you can do at the time other than just sit there in a little bit of anguish yourself for that 35 minutes. I do get that, but there's certainly benefits from it. You will witness that end-to-end process, and by just listening to the debrief, it's an absolute snapshot of that. So yeah, it does need the buy-in of the candidate for sure, but in terms of what you can take on it, and I like the point somebody just mentioned there about maybe not letting the candidate drive immediately after a mock test. I think that's very much dependent on the student, and a discussion will take part to see what's best on that. But of course, that happens after a driving test, doesn't it? That happens after a driving test, and wouldn't it be great, if you on that way back? And I know everybody on this call, all you talk about on the way back is what's happened on that test. I've done that journey hundreds of times as well. Sometimes it's just euphoria, isn't it? And you're doing nothing because they're just wanting to ring every person in the phone book, or it's that disappointment where the result hasn't gone the right way. And what do you utilize that time to do? Well, you utilize that time to reflect. If you've sat in on the test, you're in a much better position to add some value to that conversation and structure that moving forward than what you would have been from just a snapshot of the debrief. But I do appreciate it's not the easiest thing in the world to sit on a test. So, but you will get some value from it for sure.
Yeah, I think it does aid the discussion, as you've been alluding to there, definitely. Someone's made a comment here. Sometimes I go around the route again to help the candidate to realize where they went well and where they made mistakes. So that's a thought there. Yeah. Helen was asking the earlier question, that what were the changes? So thanks for that, Helen. The change is in the senior team, which has been 2 or 3 times recently. But when we had the previous senior team meeting, we learnt about the 20-mile-an-hour zones around Surbiton. So right, okay, gotcha. So there've been a few changes in the personnel and changes to the road structure in your area. So it's useful to have those conversations.
I think it's useful all the time, Kevin. If you're an ADI using you know, 1 or 2 test centres, and if you have questions, feel free to knock on the door, or if there's opportunities where the local test centre manager will be hosting a surgery, an evening event, or the open days that I referred to earlier. There's lots of them planned at the moment where it's an opportunity, certainly the open days as well, to go along and ask questions and take students if they want to, so they can get a feel for the test centre, realize that examiners are human, you know, they're just people doing a job like everybody else, and they want the best for them, you know, so those opportunities are great, and actively encourage communication. So yeah, if especially if you're new to it as well, and you know, because I think working as an instructor, obviously the people on this call are slightly different because they're all part of DIA, so they want to be part of a bit more of a community, a bit more of a, you know, which is great. But generally as an ADI, you tend to be working pretty much on your own 99% of the time. You get little opportunities like this, or at the test centre where you maybe chat to others, but it's difficult to get validation confirmation sometimes in the role that you do, and especially from the right you know, avenue. So by all means, do knock on the door and ask a question, and if you're uncertain about things, then it can only be beneficial.
Yeah, that's good. And we have a comment here with regards to, sorry, making sure that when we are having these kind of conversations with our students, that we're not just solely focusing on that being the end of their driving journey. So the comment is, surely we must avoid a student seeing the test as an end to their driving development. So trying to have discussions where we talk about the driving safe for life, as we call it, driving. So what we can
Yeah,
do.
no, absolutely, and that's where we've had some criticism maybe over the title of this campaign, Ready to Pass, and I can understand that, because of course it is about a lifetime of safe driving. It's not just about passing a driving test, and I guess that is one of the frustrations of being an ADI sometimes, isn't it? You know, you getting somebody to a level where you think, yeah, this person, of course, they're still going to be a novice driver. They've still got an awful lot to learn, but you are hoping that they will take some responsibility, certainly in that first 6 to 9 months when we know they're at the most vulnerable, to act responsible. We can't set that, you know, the test level pass at an advanced stage, because, you know, that would be unreasonable. So these people have still got a lot of development to do in that first 6 months, where, you know, the Ready to Pass campaign is about ensuring people are ready at the standard and to come prepared, as opposed to coming up and giving it a go mentality, or, you know, just coming up when they're not fully prepared. But absolutely, the role of an ADI is to prepare somebody for a lifetime of safe driving. So yeah, really pleasing comments there.
Yeah, good. And just to make sure everybody's aware, which is a good thing to flag up, to make sure that your car insurance does or doesn't allow the student to drive after the test. So someone's commented that my insurance doesn't allow the student to drive after the test, as the hire is for the test only. So best check with your own insurance company. Yeah, we do get those inquiries come into the DIA sometimes. So do check your own policies there, folks. Because obviously once the person's passed their test, then they, strictly speaking, obviously aren't a provisional license holder anymore. So does your insurance cover that? A thank you from Colin, who's got to go now. No problem, Colin. If any of you need to go at any point, please feel free, folks. We're just really reflecting on these questions now. Dash cam review. Yeah, if you've got dash cam footage, that's a good way of reviewing your mock test or the actual test. One thing that I would just add in here, if I may, as I'm scrolling through, Graham, sometimes here at the help desk at the DIA, we do get sometimes members of the public ringing up, and not very often, thankfully, but occasionally complaining about who people who live on, say, a test route, and they're a little bit fed up with not just learners driving by, but sometimes we have a complaint where instructors with their learners are parking or pulling up in inconsiderate places, or blocking people's driveways and things like that. So I had a call that this week actually, and the lady was asking, who do I talk to about this? So I recommended, as we were talking about earlier, going, knocking on the test centre manager's door and see whether they could raise that awareness locally by putting posters up in the waiting room or whatever. But I don't know if you know any other way that kind of thing can, obviously we can raise it in this forum, but
yeah, I think like you mentioned is probably the best way to do it, and how we've dealt with those kind of things in the past. But yeah, I'm not too sure of other avenues, to be honest.
No, just a little nudge for all of us there, just to make sure we are being considerate of our neighbours in our local areas. I'm sure you are, but just give that a little mention. Good.
I'm just having a little quick look myself at some of the Q&A there, and I see somebody's asking about whether or not we could post actual driving tests as a kind of learning aid with the pupils' permission. We wouldn't be able to do that, and we wouldn't really want to do it. But I think that the essence of the question is quite good, and we're having some conversations at the moment about some things that we could do in terms of video and maybe utilizing YouTube, although YouTube contractually, I'll not go into that, but it's a bit tricky, let's say, but maybe our own platforms. And I guess if there is an appetite for that, it's something I've thought about, maybe something we could do over the years in terms of some video and maybe as a learning tool. So that is something we're having conversations about at the moment. So yeah, maybe watch that space for this. But in terms of actually posting a live driving test, even with a candidate's authority, that wouldn't necessarily be something we'd be able to do. But if we could mock something up like that, then we're exploring that at the moment.
Right. Good. Someone's put a humorous comment there. Could a mock test sometimes be like the England men's football team practicing penalty shootouts?
Yeah,
one way of looking at it.
Maybe we don't need to practice anymore. We're going to win in normal time next time for sure.
Right. Okay. We have that in writing.
Yeah.
Was you looking at the Q&A box there, Graham?
I was. Yeah, I wasn't looking at the chat. I had a quick look in the Q&A.
Yeah, there was just a few more that I was looking at. I was in the chat box a moment ago. I sometimes reverse roles. The pupil becomes the examiner, and I look to make mistakes that the pupil has been doing, which highlights things. Yeah, it's good. You can see that would be a useful tool potentially. And someone else has made a comment about, are we teaching to pass the test or teaching pupils to be safe defensive drivers? So yeah, that's important that we do that. Good. Yeah, I think we have covered most things there, folks. I'm mindful of, while I'm reading, it's not very exciting for you to be on the other end, just listening to that. So someone has finally commented out, tried many times to contact my local test centre about open days, but no responses back with it, which is quite disappointing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I know we've probably done about a dozen so far, so they're quite difficult to organise, and we're trying to do it more in a sector as opposed to individual test centres. So yeah, watch this space. But even if there's no open day, if there's any specific questions that you've got, by all means drop them into the local driving test centre manager, and they should be able to help. But there's certainly more being planned in terms of open days. So watch this space. Hopefully there'll be more. I just saw another comment there in the chat or Q&A around, somebody mentioned that on their first mock test, they tend to discuss the faults initially and then subsequent ones don't. Yeah, I kind of like that. And I guess there's no wrong or right way of doing this, really. You folks are the experts. You know how to get the best out of your students. And I really like that, because hopefully the student then has got an appreciation of the level of the fault as well, the level of what they've done, why they did it wrong, rather than wait until the end and being able to actually try and recall it. So yeah, really great approach. And like we said, it's not just about doing one mock test as well. They can be utilized throughout. So yeah, I really like that in terms of the first time you do one, we're going to discuss the faults. We maybe even pull over and have a little chat about them, depending on the actual severity of the fault. But I'm going to mention them as and when they happen. And then in subsequent mock tests, we'll let that roll to the end. And then you've probably got a better understanding of how you've performed anyway. Yeah, so great strategy.
Yeah. And some other learning suggestions here about watching YouTube videos, mock tests. The gentleman saying here that their pupil finds that quite helpful to watch them and review. And world driving is one that's been recommended particularly. I've seen some of their videos. Yeah, he's got a lot of over 1 million or so views, I think.
There really is. I mean, social media. I must confess, I do watch quite a lot of the social media with ADIs and whatnot. There's some really great platforms out there at the moment. There's I won't specifically mention anybody, but there's a lot that, you know, there's a lot of people doing a lot of filming and bits and pieces, and from an educational point of view. And I think, you know, the students probably, because that's how they operate, isn't it? They're not really on Facebook so much anymore. They're on, you know, YouTube, TikTok, whatever, and they're utilizing these platforms all the time to learn. So yeah, there's some really good stuff out there, and I appreciate DVSA. We're on Instagram. We can't be on TikTok, even though it's probably one of the more used platforms. It's a government thing at the moment. But we're certainly looking to build our social media, you know, platforms and provide information such as this Ready to Pass campaign. That's what this is all about as well, you know. So yeah, some really good stuff out there.
Yes, good to keep learning and developing ourselves, isn't it? In lots of different ways we can do that now. Great. And some of you have asked, actually, a few of you have asked about CPD. How could this session today be sort of registered as a CPD? I've been racking my brains, perhaps the best way to record that. And I'll certainly say the answer would be yes. My thought would be perhaps the email that you were sent after you registered for this mock test. I would perhaps suggest maybe just typing onto that completed and then print off perhaps a copy of that email, so it shows that you've registered for the webinar and that you've completed it. And then once you printed it off, stick that into your CPD folder. So I hope that works for you. Fantastic. Thank you for all your comments, and I trust you've got something of benefit from that this morning. And please do, as I say, pass on the word and watch again if you need to. Oh, someone said they've taken screenshots. So okay, yes, there's proof that you were on here. Yeah, and by all means, do watch again on the YouTube channel. Folks, we'll end right there. I know you've got lessons to go on to, some of you, so appreciate you logging in. So do check out our DIA Academy website, and we hope to see you on the next one. All the best and have a good day.